Bonjour tout le monde, c'est Marinus ici encore. Aujourd'hui, je vais discuter mon prochaine étude, c'est le nombre des glucosides on prend le jour avant de la course pour augmenter le glycogène le niveau de glycogène dans les muscles. Parce que c'est une question qu'on voit dans la littérature, ils ne sont pas une bonne raison pour faire prendre plus ou prendre moins. Il y a beaucoup de précision dans les autres choses, dans la science, dans l'entraînement et l'alimentation, mais je crois que c'est une chose très importante, mais ils ne sont pas une raison pour faire une chose ou l'autre. So yeah, I'm just wanting to ask for any participation I can for a study looking into the question of carbohydrate recommendations the day before a race or a training session that requires glycogen loading. So no, carbohydrate loading to load your muscle glycogen stores. So if you've ever looked into the current recommendations in sports from sports science as to how much carbohydrate to take the day before a race or a hard training session, it's really quite vague in that you'll find that it recommends 8 to 12 grams per kilo of body mass. So as soon as I first saw this in my lectures, and I had a few big problems with it. First of all, that's quite a wide range. So if someone think someone asked you to go out for a training ride and they said, do like 4 to 8 hours, you'd be a bit frustrated that range was a bit vague. Or someone said takes 60 to 120 grams of carbs an hour on the ride, you think that was a bit vague. However, with this, something that I think is possibly more important, is as important as any of those things, people are quite approximate about, and we don't really have great precision. So first of all, that range is quite wide. Then my other problem is that I think it should be relative to fat-free mass rather than total body mass, because I don't see how, if the same person, if they you good? Yeah, so my other issue is that I think it should be relative to possibly to fat-free mass, or even possibly to height or training status or absolute predicted energy expenditure. For example, definitely not to just body mass, because for example, if the same individual gains or loses fat mass, I don't see how that can have, if their predicted energy expenditure remains the same, I don't see how that can have any influence in the amount of carbohydrates they need the day before a race or a hard session. So these are my kind of main problems with the current recommendations. And then I was kind of inspired by, something I knew already, but was kind of inspired by this post by Jürgendrup, sort of posing the same question, that perhaps if you've got two scenarios where a lot of these studies that have kind of formed these carbohydrate guidelines for carbohydrate loading have compared super compensated glycogen compared to depleted glycogen. And okay, I can understand that you want to have like a big contrast to definitely get a big enough result, but then we're not seeing that the reason that these people who've carbohydrate loaded have performed better is because they're carbohydrate loaded, or whether it's because they're not depleted. So perhaps if you go into this could be applied to a marathon, or I'm sort of thinking more of long road and gravel races, but that if you go into it glycogen super compensated versus just the normal glycogen levels, that come that last hour when the critical moments happen, that you're actually ending up in the same place. So in summary, this study, I want to compare sort of that using the high end of the carbohydrate recommendations for loading. Pause. So yeah, I want to compare really high carb, so the day before, to load your glycogen stores. So we're gonna anyone who wants to partake in the study, have a discussion with me. We'll kind of figure out what we kind of want to call your fat-free mass, and then we'll go for 13 grams per kilo and we want to compare that condition versus a more moderate but still high carbohydrate recommendation of 8 grams per kilo the day before this training session. Because there are several potential disadvantages to having the super high carb intake the day before, and so one of them is that each glycogen molecule, is attached to 3 grams of water. So just a simple example here. If we take those 2 examples, that could mean, say for a 70 kilo rider, that extra 5 grams per kilo could be an increase in body mass of 1.4 kilograms, which is, it's not enormous, and there could be there is an argument that that's then worth it if you've got more glycogen in the last hour. But if there's no difference in the last hour, you're just carrying around that extra 1.5 kilos for the first hour or so, which, when you're riding up a climb at say 5 watts per kilo, to make it easy numbers, that's an extra 7 watts or so. And if you've got a key moment at the start of the race, that could be the difference between making the first split or the key breakaway or not. And then there's also the issue of that, taking in that extra carbohydrate could increase GI distress, and then if you're racing regularly, having to do that all the time could make it harder for you to maintain your body composition. And part of the Jasker-Jukendrop's argument as to why you might end up in the same place is if your glycogen stores are higher in those first few hours of the race, where the energy, the intensity is lower anyway, so it's not limited by your VO2 max, it's sub-maximal, that if your glycogen stores are higher, you're just going to torch that at a faster rate. And then, like I say, when it comes to the crucial moments, you're in the same place anyway. So I'm just trying to, I just want to try and get this question answered. So if anyone wants to take part in my study, I'm keen to make it fairly flexible to get as many people as I can to partake in the study. So I've tried to base it kind of on a training session that most people would be doing anyway. So if you do a 20-minute effort after a standardized warm-up, that will try and make it around about your threshold, but slightly below, so it's definitely something that you can do repeatedly. Then you ride for 2.5 hours at about 60% of that power, and then you do a 20-minute max effort, which is kind of the input into the study. And then you repeat that once with the 8 grams per kilo condition, and then with the 13, and then the 13, and then the 8, and in a randomized order. So you do each trial twice, so we can, we've not got a learning effect or an order effect there. And I'd even be open to potentially, if it fits in better for your training, to do something like 2 10-minute efforts at a fixed power and then a 10-minute max effort. I think the advantage of this kind of non-standardized free trial is that we're actually going to be able to get much more data because we're not restricting ourselves. Potentially this could give really useful individual recommendations and could form a basis for future research.